In our last lesson, we looked at sales taxes, which are taxes that are added on after you buy an object so that you can basically pay your sales tax on it. Now, there are items that have sales tax that are indirect, which basically means that those taxes are already included in the selling price. This is a pretty common thing at most places. Now, you may be used to things like, for instance, if you buy a hot dog from a street vendor and you pay $3 for it, you don't pay $3 plus tax. It's kind of an indirect tax. It's not one of the ones we're going to talk about. It's basically they're just selling it for like, $2 and some odd cents. And then with tax, it works out to be $3. So they just say $3 and that's what you pay. So you are still paying taxes on that. You just don't see it. Indirect taxes are really a matter of things where the tax is already built in. And there are some items that you're pretty familiar with that do have indirect taxes on them. The biggest one would be gasoline. And cigarettes also have a pretty hefty indirect tax in them. There are other items that have in the past had indirect tax, but they've kind of changed over time and they've gotten rid of it. So for instance, jewelry, if you used to go buy like a ring or a necklace or something made of precious metal, it used to have an indirect tax in it. It no longer does. Things like alcohol, if you buy alcohol at a bar, has indirect tax in it. But we're not going to focus on those. We're just going to focus on the two examples of gasoline and cigarettes. Now, for those of you who are not smokers and are disgusted by smoking, I apologize. It's an example that we have to look at as a fairly notable example of indirect taxes. I'm not endorsing smoking. I'm not trying to convince you to go smoke. Quite the opposite, actually. And hopefully the prices here will scare you. So I will point out that as I'm going through this lesson, a few of these numbers are a little bit outdated because these numbers do keep changing over time, and you'll definitely see one number that you know is wrong. But just go with it. I mean, it's going to change between now and next year and the year after anyway. So to update these numbers only really buys you a couple months of satisfaction of knowing you're using the right values. So the first thing we're going to do before we actually get into those is just make sure that we understand how to find percent of a whole, which is basically a percent skill, since it is going to come up quite a bit. So just as an example, if we want to find percent of a whole, it's always the size of the part divided by the size of the whole times 100%. So example A class of 20 students has 12 girls in it. What percentage of the class is girls? Well, the size of the part is 12. The size of the whole is 20. And then multiply that by 100%. And now if you use your calculator, 12 divided by 20 is 0.6 times 100%, and 0.6 times 100 is 60, and the percent sign stays there. And I do want to emphasize that percent signs are not decorative. They can't just come and go as you please. 0.6 is not equal to 60. 0.6 is equal to 60%. It's kind of the same way that if I had something like, 25 divided by 4, I can't just say that's equal to 25 and ignore the divide by 4. Here, the percent sign is divided by 100. I can't just throw it in or take it out willy-nilly. It's got to have a reason why it's coming or going. Anyway, for part B, your grocery bill was $215.74. You spent $83.26 on meat. For those of you who are vegan or vegetarian, I apologize. Pretend it doesn't say meat. Pretend it says something else that you like. Beans, potato chips. Although if you're spending $83.26 on potato chips in a week, it's probably a bad thing. But anyway, what percentage of the bill did you spend on meat? Now in this case, it's going to be the amount of the part, 83.26, divided by the amount of the whole, 215.74, and multiply that by 100%. And same thing, I'm going to do this as a decimal number times 100% before I actually do it to the final answer. I should point out that if you look at this carefully, you should probably be able to guess it. So 83 out of 215, it's like a third, maybe a little more than a third, but around a third. Let's say it's between 30 and 40% would be my guess. So 83.26 divided by 215.74 is 0.3859. I'm going to do 0.386. You could round this off to 0.38. That's fine too. Or well, 0.39 because the 6 will round up. And when you multiply that by 100%, you get 38.6%. And if you rounded that up to 39%, I'm not going to freak out too much. All right, let's take a look at how gasoline works. So gasoline taxes are actually pretty hefty. Of the amount that you pay at the pump, only 48% of the price of the gas is the crude cost, the 48%. By the way, I'm using data from 2010, which is obviously outdated. That's because that's when I could find clear numbers for it, for the different parts of the gasoline cost. But I also then went with the 2010 gas prices of 93.9 cents a liter. Oh, those days are long gone. But of that cost, of whatever you pay at the pump, 48% goes to the crude costs, so basically the oil. Refining it costs 17% of your price that you pay. Taxes are 32% of your price. And then the profit margin that they make is about 3%. So even though gas may be expensive, its profit margin is actually pretty low. The reason that they make a lot of money is because they sell huge amounts of it. Not because they make a lot of profit on any given sale, but because everyone's buying gas all the time. Okay, so at 93.9 cents per liter, what portion of the gas price goes to each of the 4 categories in the price breakdown? So here's what we're going to do. We're just going to write down crude, which is the first one. And then we just take the 93.9 cents and we're going to multiply that by 48%. So 48%, and I'm going to skip the word of, and just jump straight to the multiplication sign since we've been using it quite a bit. And I'm actually going to write this as a dollar. And then I think I can skip the step at this point because we've been using percents quite a bit and we should be fairly comfortable with them. 48% is literally 48 divided by 100, which is 0.48. Multiply 0.48 times 0.939, and we get 0.45072. Now, I think in this case, let's just round off to the closest cent. It's going to be possibly a little wrong, but let's just round off to the closest cent. If we wanted to, we could keep one more decimal place, but if we think of this in terms of actual money, we'll round off to the closest cent. Refining and marketing. Well, that's 17% of 0.939. And while I'm going here, taxes are 32% of 0.939, and profit is 3% of 0.939. So 17% is 0.17 times 0.939 gives us 15.96 cents or 16 cents. The taxes, 0.32 times 0.939 is 30.0, so 30 cents. And the profit, well, since it's almost a dollar, I'm pretty sure this is going to be 3% or 3 cents, but it's going to be a little bit over, but I think we're going to round it off. So 0.03. And I'll just remind you that changing a number like 32% to a decimal, we move the decimal place over 2. If you only have one number, like 3%, move the decimal place over 2 means 0.03. So 0.03 times 0.939 gives us 2.8 cents. We're just going to round that off to 3 cents. And if you add that up, you should actually get, I think it's 94 cents because everything's rounded to the closest cent. So it won't give you the 0.939. If we kept one decimal place, we might be a little bit closer, but I don't think it's going to make a huge difference one way or the other. So basically, when gas prices were 94 cents a liter, we paid about 30 cents in taxes, which is a pretty hefty amount. 32% is a pretty big amount. Um, Now, some people think, well, gas is important to us. Why don't we tax it less? And there's an argument for that. But I would argue that I would rather see taxes go up on gas. Um, so, for example, some of our income tax and some of our sales tax, other sales taxes, some of our property taxes, those things go to things like repairing roads. I would rather see gas prices go up because they're taxed higher, and then lower things like sales tax or property taxes or income taxes by a similar amount, so that we're still paying the same amount overall, but there's still a push towards moving away from driving a lot. So for instance, you wouldn't want the opposite to happen. You wouldn't want income tax to go up by $2,000 a year and gas to go down to free, because then people just drive all over the place all the time. And that's not great for the environment. By increasing the taxes on gas, it helps motivate people to find alternative modes of transportation or at least drive less. And ultimately, you're getting taxed the same whether they collect it here or they collect it as part of your income tax or property taxes. So motivating people to try and drive less is always a good thing. And making people that drive way too much pay a little extra, maybe not such a bad thing. All right. Now let's talk a little bit about tobacco. Not that I want to be honest. Again, this data is a little bit old, but it's when I could find actually some concrete numbers on this stuff. It's sometimes hard to find all the details of this, so I found it for April 2015, and it's for a carton of 200 cigarettes, and this is specifically in Ontario. So of that total selling amount of $92.99 a carton, and I honestly have absolutely no idea if that's anywhere close to what cigarettes cost anymore. I'm guessing not. The pre-tax amount was actually only $29.45. So the price actually more than tripled because of taxation. And again, there's a reason for that. They used to call this a sin tax, and it's a tax for doing something that actually is detrimental to society. So the idea here is they are taxing you very high, but if you keep in mind, taxes are used for things like healthcare, and the healthcare system pays a lot of money to to basically deal with hospitalizations of people that smoke. So this was basically a fine that you're charged for smoking because you're going to cost the healthcare system more down the road. So that's often the case. And similar things with alcohol, taxation is fairly high. And the reason for that is things like drinking and driving have costed a lot. Alcoholism have costed a lot to societal programs. So they're basically building that into the price of the item. They're basically saying if you're causing this extra money, this cost, then you have to pay for some of it. Okay, so if we take a look at the details of this amount here, the store's cost per carton is $17.75. The federal duty, which is essentially a tax, we're not going to worry too much about duty right now. Some of you may have heard of duty when you're bringing an item across a border, you pay duty on it. It does apply to things like cigarettes too, but for our purposes, we'll just think of it as a specific type of tax, is $21.03. The regular federal tax is $5.36. Provincial tobacco tax is $27.97. And then HST actually applies on that, or sorry, on the pre-tax price. So that's the $29.45. And the remainder is the retail profit. So that's what the store gets to keep. So part A, what is the total tax duty on a carton of cigarettes? Okay, so there's a few things that we have to take into account here. We have the 2103, plus we have the 536, plus we have the 2797, plus we have HST, which is going to be 0.13 times the pre-tax price of 29.45. Okay, so there's four separate taxes that kind of appear in there. And HST is actually two separate taxes in itself. So there's a lot of taxation here. I'm going to do one extra step here. I don't know if you've remembered from other math courses, but there's this thing called BEDMAS that's highly important. And it says that we do brackets, exponents, multiplication, and division before we do addition and subtraction. So at the end here, we have a multiplication that we have to do before we do the additions. So 0.13 times 29.45 is 29. Oop, I think I hit the wrong button. 0.13 times 29.45 is $3.83. And now I can add up all of those. 2103 plus 536 plus 2797 plus 383. And hopefully I did that correctly. And we get a total of $58.19. So $58.19 in taxes. Ooh, that's crazy. What percent of the selling price goes to tax and duty? Ooh. Well, I'm going to point out that right off the bat that we know that 58.19 is bigger than 29.45, so it's more than 100% taxed. And the way that we do this is we do we do percent of the part over percent of the whole times 100%. Now, in this case, percent of the part is bigger than percent of the part. Let me try that one more time. The size of the part is over the size of the whole. So it's going to give us an answer over 100%. So that's 58.19 over 29.45 times 100%. And 58.19 divided by 29.45 is 1.97, I'm going to round off to 6 times 100%. And then we multiply that by 100, we get 197.6%. And again, if you rounded that off to 198%, that's cool too. So tax, normal HST is 13%, cigarette tax 197.6%. A very, very high amount. And how much profit does the store make on a carton of cigarettes? Well, if the store is selling them for $92.99, but they're paying all this extra stuff. Now, I should point out $92.99 minus the amount that we are spending on taxes, of that $92.99, they're collecting $58.19 of tax. They don't get to keep it. They pay that to the government. And then, of course, they have to subtract off the amount that they paid for the cigarettes, which is $17.75. Okay, so the $92.99, they don't get to keep the taxes. They don't get to keep the amount, well, they have to pay the amount that they paid for the cigarettes. So when we do that all together, we get $92.99 minus $58.19 minus $17.75. And I'm getting $17.05. Let's just double check that again, because that seems off to me. $92.99 minus 58.19 minus 17.75 is 17.05. Yep, that looks correct. So they get to keep about $17 of the total sale price, or of the total amount that they collect. So that's not bad, but it's also not fantastic. Selling something for almost $100 and only getting to keep 17 of it basically means you're only keeping about 20%, and retail markup is normally more than 20%. But if you sell enough of them, you're doing pretty well. Now, what is their percent profit? Now, technically, the taxation stuff, that's all cancels out. Really what it comes down to is they pay $29.45 for the item. Sorry, they pay $17.75 for the item, and they sell it for, or they make $17.05 on it. Oh, actually, hold on here. So if they make $17.05 and the amount that they pay for the item is $17.75, oh, maybe their markup's not too bad. Oh, sorry, that should be times 100%. So 1705 divided by 1775 is 0.96. You could keep an extra decimal place if you wanted to, which is 96%. So they make 96% profit on the item, which basically means they make almost double what it's worth, or double what they pay for it. Now, before you get too upset with them, please keep in mind that when we talk about stores, and people forget about this, is that you see it as, well, you bought it for 10 bucks and sold it for 20, so you're making a lot of money. Well, no, they bought it for $10 and then they paid for the rental of a store, and then they paid for electricity and maintenance costs and cleaning up and employees and advertising and a whole bunch of other things, and then got to keep the $10. And of that $10 profit, maybe they spent $8 or $9 on all those other expenses. So there's a lot of expenses involved in running a store, which is why retail markup is fairly high. But that doesn't mean that they're getting rich quick. It just means that they have a lot of expenses involved. And I challenge you to do that, where if you bought stuff for 10 bucks a piece, try and sell it for 11 and make a profit. By the time you take your time into account and the effort of going to deliver it to people or arranging for them to come pick it up, like that's not even getting a store. That's just selling on Kijiji. It's not really worth it. So high markups in retail stores is actually fairly normal. It doesn't mean that the stores are ripping you off. It just means that they're making you pay for the costs that are involved in selling. All right. There are some practice problems here that involve basically gasoline stuff and cigarette stuff. Give those a shot. If you need help with any of these, ask me and I will come help you. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next lesson. Good luck.